I made another update broadcast from the car. And you might be wondering why. Well, the primary reason was actually the phone mount, which is the thing I use to position the camera, like this, for my broadcast. I haven't had one of those for a while, and it's been causing a lot of difficulties in getting a stable place to put the camera. Anyway, here we are back again, and I thought it would be interesting to update you on what's actually going on at the moment, because there is absolutely zero news coming out of independence campaigning at the moment, and obviously nothing at all from the mainstream media, because, well, they just don't want you to hear anything. So what's been going on? Well, let's start with some statistics. You've probably all heard of Salvo, and you've probably all heard of Liberation Scotland, or Liberation.Scot. Now, both these organisations are linked. Liberation.Scot is a mass membership organisation for people who support independence, but its campaigning arm, which is known as Salvo, is also open to memberships. Now, both of these organisations do different things. Liberate.Scot actually does a lot of the background work in formulating policy and looking forward to how independence might be achieved. Salvo, on the other hand, is the campaigning arm, and it's the organisation which actively promotes how we get independence. The memberships of both of these organisations have been climbing steadily in recent months. It might interest you to know, for example, that Liberation.Scot, which is obviously a website that you can look up, has now got a membership in excess of 11,000 members, which is a considerable sum for an organisation which isn't actually a political party. Salvo, on the other hand, is a little behind. It has 7,500, or certainly maybe slightly more than that, current members. And of course, you can join both these organisations absolutely for free. So there is nothing to stop you from signing up to both of them. You can join one, you can join the other, you can join both. Either way, you're getting information from two sources. And the fact that the memberships are steadily increasing is a sign that people are beginning to wake up and starting to talk to one another. And I don't mean just talking amongst themselves. I mean talking about not just independence, but liberating Scotland from the rest of the UK in time that we can do something about the situation that we find ourselves in. You all know that at the moment we are chained to the United Kingdom, and at the present moment our own political class, and I would say that that is all of our elected representatives at Holyrood at the moment, none of them at the moment seems to have come up with any actively pursued plan for independence. I've had a number of interactions with SNP supporters recently on X and other platforms where they have rebuked me for the criticisms of the SNP recently, and saying that John Swinney keeps mentioning independence in his speeches, which he does, of course, mention in his speeches as an aspiration. But he's very light on detail. In fact, it's non-existent. As far as I can see at the moment, the SNP has no formulated process for achieving that independence which Mr. Swinney talks about. Other parties also don't seem to have coherent plans yet, including ALPA. As far as I know, anyway, at the moment, ALPA doesn't have a plan either. The ISP is more direct. The Independence for Scotland party is much more explicit in its campaigning for independence. And out of the three, it is the one at the moment which seems to be the most focused. And so I tend to mention it a little bit more frequently in my programmes than some other parties. However, it doesn't matter which party you support, as long as you support a pro-independence party. Now, why is that so important? Well, with elections coming up for Holyrood next year, in 2026, it's very important that we all vote for pro-independence parties. I'm not going to stand here and tell you how to vote, but I will tell you what to vote about, and the what is independence as we used to know it, but how I prefer to characterise it now as liberation. Independence is a hackneyed term which has lost all its meaning and all of its immediacy. It's become an unreachable star, if you like. It's seen as an aspiration. Liberation is a much more urgent priority. We need to win free from the rest of the UK. Now, to do that, there are several things that need to happen. Now, right at the moment, I think this is important to realise that in 2026 there needs to be new candidates, not on the list seats where all the smaller parties currently are focusing all their attention, but on constituency seats, the kind of seats that the SNP goes after in its campaigning. Now, the reason I mention this is that if, like myself, you feel that the SNP has kind of rather lost its way with campaigning for independence, and I'm being charitable here, then there needs to be another alternative. The alternatives at the moment are either ALPA, which at the present time I do not know whether they're fielding candidates in the constituencies, or the ISP, the Independence for Scotland Party. Again, at the present, I don't have up-to-date information on whether they're fielding constituency candidates. Liberation.Scot and Salvo may decide to field candidates. Now, I know that Salvo, although it's a campaigning arm for independence, hasn't so far thought about fielding candidates. I'm not so certain about Liberation.Scot. They might. But there's a lot of maybes in this. Political parties are much more difficult to form and far more difficult to set up than a simple organisation. And fielding candidates can be expensive because you have to pay a fee, a registration, to put up a candidate. And that's a considerable sum right from the outset. Then you've got to campaign for that candidate against other candidates. So again, more expense, and it's a big undertaking. And there are not many small organisations which have the money to do it. Now, as you'll probably be aware from my last programme, I mentioned the fact that the SNP's membership has gradually dropped over time. I would say since the end of the Salmond era, and more precipitously, I would say, after Nicola Sturgeon departed. The current membership, as far as I can understand it, looking across the internet for accurate figures, is approximately 63,000. From a high point of over 120,000 some years ago, it's dropped in half. Now, that's memberships, that's not necessarily voting intention, so it's important to get that straight. Even though the party has lost members, it may still have a huge amount of support, and I would expect that to continue. SNP supporters are not going to give up on their party straight away. There have been a large number, or an exodus of SNP members who were unhappy at the lack of any coherent plan and have moved to other parties such as ALPA or AISP, or in some other cases become independent of everybody, and standing as independent candidates for presumably independence or liberation, if you want to use the term I prefer. Now, all things being equal, we need a big pro-independence majority of MSPs in 2026. Why? Because we need that pro-independence majority in Holyrood to form a functioning government. There might be a mix of SNP successful candidates with ALPA, and maybe ISP, and maybe some others, and some independents mixed in there. But whatever the mix is, it needs to form a coherent group which will campaign not just passively for independence, won't just mention it as a passing aspiration, but will actually campaign to hold an independence referendum in full defiance of the United Kingdom. Because at some point, our Scottish government will need to repudiate the Union completely. That means reject it completely. And totally disregard all of its rules and its policies, and ignore all UK government diktats which come north of the border telling us what our government can and can't do. They need to re-empower our Scottish Parliament. Now, you might think, well, that can't happen while we're under English rule because the Scottish Parliament is an offshoot of Westminster. Well, yes, it is at the moment. But in the background, you're probably already aware that Salvo has sent an emissary to the United Nations. And it has already delivered the historical facts and evidence supporting our contention that Scotland is not in a voluntary union at all. That what it is an annexed territory of England, because the facts, the historical facts, which incidentally are not contested by the English side at all, show that there was no legislation created at Westminster which created a new country of the United Kingdom. It's not a country. It is still a union of two nations which keep their independent status from one another in a single unitary state, which is not the same thing as a country. What it means is that the United Nations now will see that Scotland is not a part of a country, that it is an annexed territory, that it's having its resources removed against its will, without the permission of its people, and with no written clauses in any of the Union documents, including the treaty, the original Treaty of 1707, which was actually scrapped almost as soon as the ink was dry on it and was replaced with something else. So there's never been a union. And now that the UN knows that, we also know that several other countries who are members of the United Nations also now recognise that Scotland should be listed for decolonisation. And once you have that tacit support, even if it's only provisional, and at this stage it's unconfirmed and unofficial, but even if it's, even if it's just provisional, and the diplomats from these three countries have intimated that they would support Scotland's bid for decolonisation, that allows a lot of other things to start happening back here. And the biggest move that we can make would be to re-empower our own parliament once the decolonisation is agreed at the UN. Because once that process starts, that is a process which the United Kingdom has to participate in. Scotland has to be decolonised under the United Nations C24 Committee's Charter, because once that's been decided there, the English state cannot veto it. It's not something where they can say, no, we're not going to do it because we are a United Nations Security Council member and we have a veto. This is not a Security Council matter. This is an entirely different issue on which the coloniser and the colonisees, otherwise known as Scotland, have to participate in the decolonisation process together. And that would mean, that would enable the people of Scotland to elect a government next year while this is going on, the purpose of which is to start the process of decolonisation by affirming that our parliament is fully sovereign, that the people of Scotland are the sovereign power holders, if you like, in Scotland, and that what they say the parliament should be doing is what will happen. That means that there needs to be an act of parliament in Holyrood, the legislation for which would say that this piece of legislation, this new law, restores all the powers of functional government to Holyrood at one stroke. And I'm pretty sure that it would carry a majority vote in Holyrood if it happens. The reason I feel that it's now the time to start thinking about doing this is because once the UN decolonisation is agreed and begun, the English state can no longer ignore it, but it also gives us the freedom we need to take back control of our own parliament, and we can legitimately do that with the tacit support of these three other UN members who have apparently already intimated that they would support Scotland's bid. So all of these things currently being unofficial, not officially confirmed in writing, well, okay, I'm happy to accept the fact that what I'm telling you at the moment is conjecture. It's based on what you would call hearsay, but I heard it from the person who was there at the UN. And I would trust that person to tell me the truth about this. The intimation is that these other nations would support us if we decolonise. That's an if. It's caveated by the fact that we have to succeed in the decolonisation application. But the case for decolonisation is extremely strong. You just need to change a few minds on the Decolonisation Committee, and we have a diplomat in Craig Murray who's well capable of doing that. So we've reached an interesting phase in our recent history where Scotland's on the brink of having the power to do something it couldn't do before, which is to re-empower its own parliament, while decolonisation is agreed at the United Nations out with the control of the Westminster Parliament. So I'm optimistic. These are very high stakes times for us, and I don't want to underplay that. This is a big risk because we need to win this decolonisation argument at the UN. But I know that Craig Murray, despite other people making all kinds of accusations against Mr. Murray, that he is exactly the sort of person you want to be fighting this case, because you need somebody with that diplomatic expertise who knows all the people concerned in the UN that he needs to convince. And I believe that he can do the job. And based on that, I would say the prospects for 2026 and populating our entire Scottish Parliament with a majority of pro-independence MSPs who will then come up with the legislation to take back the powers of our national parliament may actually happen. Because once you have the comfort of knowing that the UN's behind you and 3 other nations are already saying, yeah, we support this, and the fact that the English state, or the UK, if you want to call it that, cannot do anything to prevent it, it gives you an awful lot of confidence to do other things. Anyway, I thought I'll leave it there today, but just to give you a little catch up on where we're at. Once I hear some more concrete news from the UN or elsewhere, I'll let you know. But in the meantime, keep the faith, as I always say, because if you lose faith, you just lose the will to keep campaigning. Keep campaigning, keep doing what you currently do more of it, but also talk to people who are not in your bubble. It's very important that we talk to our neighbours about this, and just talk to them generally about how they feel about the prospects of staying in the UK versus leaving the UK and getting back control over all our resources. And once you start talking in those terms, people begin to think, yeah, you're right. You know, that if we had all of our oil revenues, all our gas revenues, and all of the money from exporting our electricity, we'd be in a very different place from where we are now. Anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today. Hope you've enjoyed the programme. Please keep up your support by liking and subscribing and commenting on these live streams. But also, if you can afford it, and I emphasize the word if you can afford it, please make any donation you can, and I will post a link somewhere on X and on other platforms today so that you can do that. But that's it from Inde-Car today. Enjoy the day. It looks like it's going to be a bit rainy where I am, so I hope the weather's better where you are. And I'll see you in a few days' time, but I'll certainly be back on Friday with Norrie Hunter at 9:30 for Hodna Jacob. That's it from me. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.